Hello, and welcome to this introduction to some of the issues surrounding internationalisation in higher education. During the taught session, we looked in particular at some of the key practical implications of teaching and assessing a diverse cohort of students that included international and in particular non-native speaking students. Here, I want to focus more on the broader context for internationalisation, and in particular to highlight how and why it's experienced and interpreted in different ways by different people. To help me do this, I'm going to draw on a 2014 paper by Martin Hague. I should say before I begin, I'm not advocating an uncritical reading of the paper. I'm simply using it as a helpful way in, as it were, to reflecting on the complex and often contested character of internationalisation. And I'm doing this because I think that, and you may well disagree of course, we often don't properly acknowledge this complexity and contestation when we talk about internationalisation, or indeed any number of policy agendas that shape and inform policy and practice in turn within higher education. As its title suggests, internationalisation, according to Hague, is a multi-layered phenomenon. What's interesting and helpful about the paper, in my opinion, is that it offers a clear and accessible introduction to some of the complexities surrounding internationalisation, revealing how its meanings, implications, underpinning assumptions, etc., are contested, as Hague says in the introduction. This paper explores the multiple coexisting, sometimes competitive narratives about the character and purposes of internationalisation, and attempts to find some order amidst the polyphonic chaos. To help him do that, Hague refers to what he describes as 8 coexisting narrative layers where internationalisation is concerned. And I'll give you a few moments to look at these, but please do press pause if you need more time. And for the remainder of this tutorial, I'm not going to try and cover them all. I'm just going to focus on the 4 layers I've emboldened there, largely because these are the ones I've looked into in more detail myself. But obviously I'd recommend that you looked at the article in its entirety in order to explore more fully all 8 layers that Hague identifies. Okay, so layer 1 then refers to the recruitment of international students and uses that term there, milking the cash cows. And this layer refers, as its name suggests, to the commercial and economic imperatives for internationalisation in HE. And it's perhaps the narrative we've grown most familiar with. And this is how Hague describes this particular layer. In the struggle for survival, in a world where the accountant's bottom line is king, recruiting international students to sustain the fiscal viability of the academy or some part thereof is self-evidently a good idea. Unsurprisingly, it has become a policy vigorously promoted by many university leaders and financial management teams. So this first narrative layer suggests that promoting internationalisation is about financial survival. So within this layer, and indeed the others, what Hague is doing is he's in part sort of inhabiting, for want of a better term, the narrative layer in order to reveal its guiding values and assumptions, etc. Layer 2 concerns itself with an apparent deficit model that often informs both how international students are perceived and what universities think they should do in response. This model, Hague explains, tends to problematize international students and pursue remedies that focus exclusive or predominant attention on the international student's ability to internalize the norms and expectations of the university, the better to fit in inverted commas. Of this model, Hague writes, one key cause of the deficit perception is the ethnocentricity that manifests as a university's hidden curriculum. In the classroom, teaching and learning discourses, academic style, and assessment practices are all cultural artifacts. Studies suggest that most host institution instructors believe that it is the job of the international incomer to adapt and learn to fit in. Suggestions that they might adjust the way they teach are often roundly dismissed, and the notion of reciprocal teaching remains a dream. obviously I'll leave it to you to decide based on your own experiences and observations, etc., to judge how accurate or otherwise this particular presentation of internationalization, cultural deficit assumptions, etc., is. I will say, though, that I do detect certain parallels, I think, with the discourse that has often greeted the increased diversity of the UK-based student body. Like international students, they too are often othered, often referred to in deficit terms, with efforts made to help make them behave more in line with some imagined middle-class white norm, often only tacitly acknowledged, if at all. The notion that this norm might itself be one that we challenge or critique has, in my experience at least, remained largely ignored or marginalised. But once again, you may well disagree. Okay, so coming on to skipping on, several layers to layer 5, and here Hague refers to the notion of internationalisation at home. So the benefits it is presumed UK students can derive from studying in an increasingly international environment, and how UK students can build their capacities in doing so. Interestingly, Hague detects a certain tension within this layer between those who advocate more critical, self-reflexive encounters with the often unquestioned assumptions that one's culture is the norm, from which others, depart or are defined against, and those who pursue a more instrumentally driven agenda in which a certain degree of cultural awareness is deemed to add stock to the individual UK student's human capital. Hague summarises the latter view thus: in practice, internationalisation at home tends to focus on those multicultural and professional competencies that avoid offence, such as different patterns of business etiquette. Having some understanding may grant a competitive edge by allowing its owner to reach client others where they live. So internationalisation is about helping local students compete successfully in an increasingly cosmopolitan world of work by expanding their intercultural and cross-cultural competency. And this leads quite nicely into the next layer, layer 6, which is concerned with global citizenship, and in particular higher education for global citizenship. And the literature around global citizenship, Hague explains, or the debates within global citizenship literature, I should say, also address themselves to the assumptions underpinning and the implications of studying in a more international environment, but also being more conscious of the self in relation to the global context within which we live, study, work, etc. And in this section of the article, Hague describes 3 strands of global citizenship. First of all, developing a notion of self and humanity that transcends ties of family, nation, etc. And this in turn necessitates an ability to communicate across cultural boundaries. The second is eco-literacy, which, as its name suggests, implies a willingness and ability to live sustainably with others. And the third, which is closely related to the other two, refers to learning to live ethically with others, and this implies a conscious concern, Hague explains, for questions of social justice, rooted in a strong sense of personal responsibility to the other. Within this layer, Hague explains, internationalisation is about helping learners understand that they are citizens of the world. They should respect its limits and the rights of all its inhabitants, current and future, and accept their personal responsibilities for the welfare of all. Now, as with internationalisation as a whole, the notion and concept of global citizenship is itself debated, and there are different voices and different views, and these reflect, as you would expect, different theoretical and political perspectives. And I've just included some references here for people who are interested in pursuing this further. Do pause if you need to make a note of these, but I will make sure that these are reproduced on the LLI blog, and also some of them at least will be linked to directly from the reading list section of the Blackboard course for the postgraduate certificate. Vanessa Andreotti, the reference at the top there, provides what I think is a very interesting approach to the question of global citizenship. She approaches it through a post-colonial lens, and provides or articulates a distinction in her view between what she describes as soft and critical or liberal and post-colonial notions and practices of global citizenship. The soft liberal approach, according to Andreotti, is one where the emphasis is on supporting development, in inverted commas, of the global south or people within the global south through the voluntary transfer of wealth, resources, expertise, etc. The critical approach, by contrast, involves a far more consciously political reckoning with enduring colonial and neo-colonial structures and asymmetries of power and privilege. And Andreotti argues that these different approaches themselves imply very different conversations with students. And just sticking with this topic a little bit longer, you can probably guess it's the element of internationalization that carries most interest for me. I'd also like to highlight a couple of online resources relevant to these debates around global citizenship and internationalization. The first is globalsocialtheory.org, which in my opinion is a really excellent collection of brief and accessible introductions to a wide range of concepts, theorists and ideas, and covers diverse themes including post-colonial theory, intersectional feminism, neoliberal capitalism, and in particular how that relates to the global south, the politics of borders and migration, of course an exceedingly topical area of concern right now, and it covers much more besides. And another really valuable resource, in my opinion, is the Open Spaces for Dialogue and Inquiry, or OSDI methodology website, and this provides practical resources to help stimulate critical discussions on key themes of interest around global citizenship, global justice, climate justice, etc. Although originally designed for use in schools, I think the resources could be readily adapted for HE context, and once again Vanessa Andreotti has been central to the construction of these resources, and she's written elsewhere about the application of the OSDI methodology to adult tertiary educational settings. So if this is stuff you'd like to discuss further, I'd be delighted to hear from you, and certainly keen to work with anyone who wants to, I suppose, build more critical conceptions of global citizenship into their teaching or curriculum as appropriate. Okay, so in summary then, internationalisation in HE is multi-layered and contested. It means different things to different people, and those differences in turn reflect the diverse and sometimes conflicting, I think that point's really important, values and priorities at work within contemporary HE. Global citizenship in particular, its purpose, value and implications, is likewise a contested field of theory and practice, where once again values and politics come strongly into play. Okay, well, I'll leave it there. Thank you ever so much for listening, and as I said a few moments ago, if you'd like to explore any of these questions further, please do drop me a line. Thank you very much.